Hello friends, welcome to my channel. This is Abhirami and I am here to discuss with you about today's topic, that is the introduction to the cell. Okay, so this is the first video that's going to be on physiology. So let's start with today's topic. So cell, what does a cell mean? Cell is the functional and structural unit of life, and each cell has all the characteristics of life. Okay, and the cell has some general characters, so let's talk about them now. Each cell needs nutrition and oxygen, okay, and it produces its own energy for its growth and metabolism. Okay, and the cell also excretes out carbon dioxide and other metabolic wastes, and it is excreted out of the body. Okay, and the cell maintains the medium, that is, it maintains the pH and the environment for its survival. The cell also identifies invaders and immediately reacts to them, and all cells reproduce by division except neurons, which do not reproduce. Now let's talk about the tissue. So tissue is a group of cells that have a similar function, and the tissue makes all the organs in our body, and the tissue is divided into four major types. Okay, so all tissues come under these four types. These four types include the muscular tissue, nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, and the connective tissue. Okay, examples for the muscular tissue include the skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, and the smooth muscles. Okay, and the example for the nervous tissue includes the neurons and the supporting cells. The examples for the epithelial tissue include the squamous epithelium, cuboidal epithelium, and columnar epithelium. And the examples for the connective tissue include the connective tissue proper, and then the blood, cartilage, and bone. Okay, so the connective tissue proper is divided into dense connective tissue and loose connective tissue. Okay. Now let's talk about organs. So organs are structures which are made up of two or more types of primary tissues. Okay, so an organ is made up of two or more types of primary tissues, but sometimes an organ can be made up of all four tissues also. Okay, so the organ is mainly of two types, that is hollow organs or tubular organs, and the second type is the parenchymal organs or the compact organs. Okay, so these are the two types of organs. Either the organ is hollow or it is compact. Okay, and many organs function together to perform a specific activity, and this is called as a organ system. Okay, and the organ system is made up of the respiratory system, circulatory system, cardiovascular system, excretory system, etc. Okay, so now let's talk about the cell. The cell has a cell membrane and a cell body. Okay, so this is the structure of a cell, and the black thing that is covering the cell is called the cell membrane. Okay, and the cell body composes the nucleus and the cytoplasm. Okay, so this is the nucleus and rest is called the cytoplasm. All the organelles of the cell lie in the cytoplasm. Okay, and outside the cell there are three things called the extracellular space, extracellular fluid, and extracellular matrix. Okay, so extracellular space is divided into two, that is interstitial space and vascular space. Okay, so extracellular space is divided into two, interstitial space and vascular space. Interstitial space is the space between two cells from the same tissue. Okay, so it is the space between two neighboring cells from the same tissue. And vascular space is the extracellular portion of the circulation. So the vascular space usually contains the blood vessels and capillaries, etc. Okay. So now let's talk about the extracellular fluid. So all the body fluid present outside the cell is called the extracellular fluid. So the extracellular fluid is mainly consisting of three things, that is blood, plasma, and transcellular fluid. Okay, blood, plasma, and transcellular fluid. And then last comes the extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is a complex meshwork of components secreted by the cells. Okay, and they mainly include the proteoglycans, glycoproteins, and fibrous proteins such as elastin and collagen. Okay, so coming back to the cell is made up of three main components, that is the cytoplasm, nucleus, and cell membrane. Now let's talk in detail about the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is a protective sheath that covers the cell body, that includes the cytoplasm and the nucleus. Okay, so this is the cell membrane and it is a protective sheath for the cell body. And the cell membrane is also called as the plasma membrane or the plasma lemma. Okay, we call the cell membrane as plasma lemma, especially in muscle tissues. Okay, so the cell membrane is called as plasma lemma or plasma membrane, and it covers the cell body, it protects the cell body. Okay, the cell membrane separates the extracellular fluid from the intracellular fluid. Okay, so the fluid outside the cell membrane is called the extracellular fluid. Okay, so this is the extracellular fluid outside the cell membrane, and the intracellular fluid is inside the cell membrane. Okay, so the cell membrane separates the extracellular fluid from the intracellular fluid. Okay, the extracellular fluid consists of the blood, plasma and transcellular fluid. Okay, so any fluid outside, any body fluid outside the cell is called the extracellular fluid. So now let me repeat it again. The cell membrane is a protective sheath and it is also called as the plasma membrane or the plasma lemma, and it separates the extracellular fluid from the intracellular fluid. Okay, and the cell membrane acts as a semi-permeable membrane. That means only a certain substances can pass through it freely. The others cannot pass through it freely. Okay. The width of the cell membrane is about 75 angstroms to 111 angstroms. Now let's talk about the composition of the cell membrane. So the cell membrane is majorly made up of the proteins. So the proteins come first. 55% of the cell membrane is made up of the proteins. Okay, and 40% of the cell membrane is made up of the lipids. The left 5% is made up of the carbohydrates. Okay, so 55% is made up of proteins, 40% is made up of lipids, and 5% is made up of carbohydrates. Okay, so now let's talk about the structure of the cell membrane in detail. Okay, so this is how the cell membrane actually looks. So on the basis of the structure of the cell membrane, we can say that it is a unit membrane or a three-layered membrane. Okay, but cell membrane is actually made up of phospholipid bilayer and the associated proteins. Okay, so the cell membrane is made up of the phospholipid bilayer and its associated proteins, and according to its structure, on the basis of its structure, we can say it is a three-layered membrane or a unit membrane. Okay, so how do we call it a three-layered membrane? What are the three layers? The three layers include one electron lucent layer and two electron dense layers. Okay, so electron lucent layer is present in the center and the electron dense layers are present on the sides, on the either sides. Okay, so the electron lucent layer includes the lipid layer and the electron dense layer are made up of the proteins. Okay, so that is the structure of the cell membrane. Actually, electron lucent means a space where the electrons are less, and electron dense layers means the space where there are many number of electrons. Okay, so the protein layers are electron dense and the lipid layer is electron lucent. And there are two protein layers and one lipid layer. Okay, so on the base of the structure, we can say it is three-layered. Now let's talk about the models of the cell membrane. So there are three models until now. The first is the Danieli-Davison model, and then comes the unit membrane model. The last one that we follow right now is the Singer-Nichols model. Okay, so now let's talk about the Danieli-Davison model. The Danieli-Davison model was proposed in 1935 by Danieli and Davison. Okay, and this model suggests that the cell membrane is a sandwich of lipids covered by proteins on either sides. Okay, so this was proposed on 1935. Okay, 1935. The next came the unit membrane model. The unit membrane model was proposed by J.D. Robertson on 1957. Okay, so this model was proposed on 1957. And the Singer-Nichols model was proposed on 1972. Okay, so unit membrane model was proposed by J.D. Robertson on 1957 on the basis of electron microscopy. Okay, The Singer-Nicholson model was proposed in 1972 by Singer and Nicholson, and they said that the cell membrane was made up of proteins which were found to float in the lipid layer. Okay, and it can also be said as a mosaic of proteins in the lipid layer. Mosaic means a group of tiles or stones which are colored and they are arranged together in different patterns. Okay, so that's what mosaic means. Mosaic means arranging different patterns of colored stones or tiles or glasses together. Okay, so that's what mosaic means normally. But when they say mosaic of proteins, it means the proteins are arranged on the lipid layer in different patterns. Okay, so that is Singer-Nicholson model. Next, we will be talking in detail about the lipid layer of the cell membrane. Okay, so I already told you that the cell membrane was made up of the phospholipid bilayer and its associated proteins. Now we will be talking about the lipid layer. The lipid bilayer is actually the central portion. I told you there is one electron lucent layer in the central area and two electron dense layers. So the central area is made up of lipids. It is made up of two layers of lipids. That's why it is called as phospholipid bilayer. Okay, and it is made up of a thin film of lipids which are arranged in two layers. And the characteristic of the lipids is such that it is liquid in nature and not a solid structure. Okay, that is the characteristic of lipids. It is liquid in nature but not a solid structure. Okay, so any portion of the cell membrane can move from one point to another. So that means any substance that can dissolve in the lipid layer can also move to other areas of the cell membrane. Okay, so this is the phospholipid bilayer. This is one layer and this is the second layer. Okay, we will be talking about this in detail soon. So the lipid layer is mainly made up of phospholipids and cholesterol. Okay, so there are some phospholipids which are present in the cell membrane. I will be naming them now. So the phospholipids present in the cell membrane include the aminophospholipid, okay, and then the sphingomyelin, and then the phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethanolamine, phosphatidylserine, phosphatidyl'inositol, and phosphatidylglycerol. Okay, so these are the 7 phospholipids present in the cell membrane, and the phospholipid bilayer or the central layer is mainly made up of phospholipids and the cholesterol. Okay, now let's talk about the phospholipid layer in detail. Okay, so this is the phospholipid layer, and this is the head portion of the phospholipid and the tail portion of the phospholipid. So before we get into the structure of the phospholipid, let us know about what is phospholipid, what is it made of. Phospholipid is made up of phosphorus and fatty acids. Okay, and they have two parts, that is the head and the tail. Okay, so these long lines are called the tail and the rounded part is called the head. Okay, so the phospholipid represents a headed pin in shape. Okay, so this is the headed pin in shape, so it is having a round head and a thin tail. Okay, so the tail is the water fearing part or the hydrophobic part, and the head is the water loving part or the hydrophilic part. Okay, so the head always faces the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid. Okay, so the head faces the extracellular fluid, and on the inner leaflet it faces the intracellular fluid. Okay, and the tails together form the central portion. Okay, and the tail is the water hating part or the hydrophobic part. So only those fat soluble or lipid soluble substances can pass through the cell membrane from out of the cell into the cell. Okay, and also the head portion is called as the polar end and the tail portion is called as the non-polar end. Okay, because the head portion is hydrophilic and the tail portion is hydrophobic. So now let's talk about the cholesterol. So the cholesterol is this blue color thing, okay, and this is the integral proteins. So I told you the cell membrane is made up of the phosphorus, phospholipid and the associated proteins. So this comes under the proteins. Okay, this is the integral protein and these are the cholesterol. The blue markings are the cholesterol. The cholesterol actually helps to pack the cell membrane. Okay, so the phospholipids are soft and oily and it packs the phospholipids and it contributes in the structural integrity of the cell membrane. Okay, so that is the function of the cholesterol. And as I already told you, the central layer of the cell membrane is a lipid layer and its central portion is formed by the tails which are hydrophobic. So the hydrophobic tails only allow the fat soluble substances to pass through the cell membrane. Okay, so examples of fat soluble substances include oxygen, carbon dioxide and alcohol. So oxygen, carbon dioxide and alcohol can pass in and out of the cell membrane easily. So this is why the cell membrane is called semi-permeable, because it allows some substances, that is the fat soluble substances and low molecular weight substances, to pass through it freely. But substances like glucose, urea and electrolytes, which are water soluble, cannot pass through the cell membrane. Okay, so they use the help of carrier proteins or channels to pass through the cell membrane. So that is the end of this session. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe and comment on it. And I will be talking about the proteins in the cell membrane in a separate video. Okay. If you have doubts in bones of the upper limb chapter 2, you can visit my previous videos. Thank you.